want to go. I don't know if my family, our church is amazing, our ministry is amazing, all that stuff. But I tell my students at Liberty all the time, God's going to tell you to do things. Sometimes it doesn't make sense, whatever, but you always say yes no matter what He tells you to do. And we said yes. My family went to Lynchburg. And so now I've been teaching at Liberty now, training the next generation of youth pastors and youth ministry leaders for the last 6 years. And I teach 6 classes residentially. I teach 3 more online. And then about 2 years into being at Liberty and teaching there, Thomas Road Baptist Church, I was not going to church there. I was going to a different church, but Jonathan Falwell and some of the leadership at Liberty pulled me, or at Thomas Road pulled me in, and they're like, "Hey, listen, our student ministry is struggling. Is there any way you could help us out?" I was like, "No, I don't have the margin." And but my heart was really, just man, I just miss it so bad, just being in the trenches. So 4 years ago, I signed on, and now for the last 4 years, I've also been leading the student ministry at Thomas Road. I'm a staff and a team, and God has been doing some incredible stuff. In fact, this semester already, we have seen 46 kids come to know Jesus in our student ministry. And next weekend, we're baptizing 16 students on Sunday morning from our student ministry. We also baptize students on our ministry night, and so really cool God stuff's happening. And so now I get to lead a student ministry, about 500 students every week. Plus I, teach in the classrooms. That's a bit of my story, a bit about me. And I'm a youth ministry nerd when it comes to this stuff. So I read everything, I study everything, I connect with churches all over the country, and try to learn as much as I can about it. That's what I did sort of my PhD work and stuff in as well. So all that to say, that's a little bit about me. Now, one thing I want to mention before I jump into this, there's a couple things. Here's the first thing. This is not like I'm going to preach a sermon at you, all right? I can, but I want this to be as beneficial for you as possible and interactive as possible. So if at any time, and I tell my students this and I teach at Liberty, if any time I say something or we get into something that sparks something, you have a question, just raise your hand and we can pick up where we left off, and let's just make it, like that. Does that make sense? I can talk about this stuff for hours, and if that's what we do, then that's fine. That's what we'll do. But if you want to kind of interact with it, hey, I got a question about, hey, when you said this, well, hey, what would you do in this situation? And I'll try to help you the best I can with that type of stuff. The second, yeah, good.
By the way, I forgot to mention, you guys have handbooks on your table, so if you guys want to take notes or anything, this is where you have to do that, or on your notepad.
Also, I know that the third session we're doing is going to be like a Q&A session specifically. So all day today, as you think of things maybe that are specific to your groups or to anything you're leading and doing, and you're like, hey, how about whatever, slip that in there as well. That's the first thing I want to say. The second thing is I want to mention something that you were talking about earlier as I was looking over this, and this is just kind of a side thought. This is not something I was planning on talking about, but since I see it on here, being in ministry over a while now, and I know some of you have been in church for a long time as well, and so you've kind of seen cultural changes sort of take place, right? And what the big issues that churches are tackling over certain sort of time periods or whatever, right? So maybe if you were to kind of back up a bit, you might go, man, like maybe in like the 80s, kind of like the faux pas thing was like maybe like divorce or something like that, right? And then as you kind of go ahead, there's sort of kind of a new era of things. I feel like over the last, maybe we'll call it like the last 10 years or so, the last decade, 2010 to 2020, although it was certainly prevalent pre that, although it's going to certainly be prevalent going forward. Over the last 10 years, I feel like the LGBTQIA plus community and conversations and all that, I feel like that was kind of the dominant, that has been kind of the dominant conversation. How does the church respond? How do we minister to students? How do we deal with these situations? All of those type of things, which I think is certainly going to be, is still something we're going to deal with going forward. I think the church has a pretty good grasp on that now, where maybe it didn't as much, back in 2010. Back in 2000, from 2000 and I would say 2010 and under, I can only remember one student who showed up to my student ministry that was a transgender student. In the last 10 years, I've probably had 100. And so it's just a different dynamic, you know what I'm saying, related to that. I think the next 10 to 15 years, the number one thing is going to be Islam. That is going to be the number one thing. And though I think that Islam has been something that, we had a lot of conversations about kind of post early 9/11, for those of us that were there then, like I was, and so we kind of, there was some conversations and things going on there. But I'll tell you what I'm seeing on the student ministry, and not just student ministry, but college side of things. Right now, most of the a lot of we and for those of you that are kind of in on social media and stuff like that, maybe you've seen some of this type of stuff. But feminism has been something that has been some kind of massive movement of feminism over the last 20 years, and that kind of taken a place, in our culture and all of that, to where it's kind of a militant type feminism now. What has happened over the last 3 to 4 years is now there's sort of a counterculture to that, which is like men going, I'm not dealing with this feminism thing. I'm not dealing with this OnlyFans thing. I'm not dealing with any of this type of stuff. That stuff's trash, all this type of stuff. So then you have these sort of major podcasts by different people that are now sort of going up pushing against that. And these messages that they're talking about and the things that they're saying to kind of push against sort of the feministic sort of idea are resonating big time with young men, like big time with young men. And if you go and do a little bit of digging, what you find is that almost all of these people that are leading these type of things are Muslims, almost all of them, or they have Islam in their background. All right, and so even take people like the Andrew Tates of the world, people like that. These are people that are So when you're talking about Islam, I think this is a big deal. I think this is going to be something that we're going to be dealing with, and then obviously with what's going on in Israel right now, with all of that, it's putting a lot of this messaging and stuff on the front end. When you look at TikTok, you look at Instagram, you look at this, you look at Reels, there's a lot of sort of Muslim voices that are on there that are talking about things, trying to discredit the Bible, this is what Islam is about. This is what this, and if you don't have any theological backing, you don't have any understanding, you're biblically illiterate, you don't have a solid foundation or worldview or whatever, these messages are becoming very appealing to young people and particularly young men. And I think that over the next 10 to 15 years, I think that is going to be a new sort of thing that we're going to be dealing with in the church that I think is going to be more prevalent than the other side, which is the LGBTQ stuff. You know what I'm saying? I think that's going to end up being more prevalent. All right. I want to start out and say, you guys are crushing it. You're awesome, and you're crushing it. Now, I know you're like, okay, what do you mean by that? Well, here's what I mean by that. You're crushing it because, for one, you are investing in the next generation. You're investing in these middle school and high school students, and it is not only currently having a significant impact in their life, but it is going to have an impact in their life for the rest of their life. In fact, this is a quote I'll give you here. I'm quoting myself here. Here we go. There is not a single factor in the literature that proves to have a greater impact on future retention as an adult than previous youth ministry commitment. Not even two parents that believe in Jesus. Actually, what the research is showing is that youth ministry proves to have the highest level of retention for someone walking with Jesus as an adult than any other factor in the literature. Now, I know that's a bold claim, and I'm saying it's in the literature. So I've studied the literature. So you say, okay, well, what is that? Well, here's what I'm telling you. The statistics and studies tell us that around 80% of kids who grow up in a home with believing parents walk with Jesus or have a relationship with God or in the church as an adult. Now, so what are the statistics then? You're telling me that if I have parents, mom and dad both believe in Jesus, that the chance of the kids walking with Jesus as an adult is 80%. Are you saying that people who are in youth ministry is higher than that? Yes. And I'm not saying that it's marginally higher than that. I'm saying it's significantly higher than that. Well, wait a minute. I've been serving in student ministry for a while. Some of you have. And as you've been serving in student ministry, I'm sure you've heard over the tenure of your student ministry that droves of kids leave the church when they graduate high school and they go off to college. Depending on the pollster or person that you listen to, somewhere between 70 to 90% are leaving the church and leaving the faith as soon as they step into college. Now, here's the question. Where does that statistic come from? In fact, just a couple years ago, I researched how many references in the literature that this idea that kids are leaving the church in droves, how many are in the literature. And just through online resources, there are over 3 million references in the literature. 3 million. The kids are leaving the church in droves when they graduate from high school. Now that's crazy, because when you start doing the backtracking and you start going and trying to find the inception of these statistics, you find a massive problem. They aren't there. And so myself, as well as another guy named Brandon Shields out of Southern Seminary, we've tracked over the last 10 years, tracked back and tracked down every single statistical idea that kids are leaving the church in droves when they graduate high school. And here's what we found. Almost all of them are made up. Completely made up. As an example, Jay Strack, who is the president of Student Leadership University, Brandon Shields interviewed him and said, "Hey, you're one of the first people that said kids are leaving the church in droves. Where did you get that from?" And Jay Strack said, "It just felt that way." Well, you can't get on the stage at a youth pastors conference and tell all the youth pastors that kids are leaving the church in droves because you felt that way. So then Barna, you guys heard of Barna Research Group? They are actually the first in the literature to put something in print. This was back around 1993. They put in print that kids are leaving the church in droves. I've researched the entire survey and everything that they did to come up with that study, as well as Shields. And there is not a single question on the entire survey that asked any questions about previous church commitment, current church commitment, where are you now, where were you then, any of that type of stuff. In fact, the survey wasn't even on kids leaving the church there wasn't one question on it, not one. Yet randomly, when they produced the results of the study, they said, and by the way, kids are leaving church in droves at a rate of around 85%. Like, where does this come from? There was this feeling in the 90s that, like, when kids left your church, they leave the church. And the truth is that, let's say you were all seniors in my student ministry and we lived here in this area. Well, if you graduated from my student ministry, the chance of you staying at my church are not that high over the next 12 months. Because for most of you, you're going to go to college somewhere, and it's probably going to be out of town. So it's not that you left the church, it's that you left my church. So it began to create this sentiment that all these kids are leaving the church when they're actually not leaving the church. And so what happened was, there are really only about 6 statistics in all the literature anywhere that kind of have some claim that students are leaving the church. 2 by Lifeway, 2 by Barna, which, by the way, sell resources and sell books and build, you know what I'm saying? And you're like, well, wait a minute, like Lifeway, like one of my closest friends in ministry oversees the youth ministry department of Lifeway. We have robust discussions about this because the claims that Lifeway makes, Shields' study and my study completely refute those claims. And there's a thing in research called a falsification verification study. It was created by this guy by the name of Karl Popper back in the 1950s. And the idea is that any type of study and research that you do, you should research things over and over and over and over and over again in order to verify the results of the study. The problem in youth ministry is there's so little research, so little data, so little that there is not enough data to really make a massive conclusion about what's happening. Does that make sense? So what happens is, a falsification study is called a black swan study. The idea behind a black swan study is this. Popper would say this. He would say, if I said I had a hypothesis that all swans are white, all of them are white, how many black swans would I have to see in order for that hypothesis to be untrue? Just one. If I see one black swan, then now the hypothesis that all swans are white can no longer be true. And then he would say, in the same way, the same goes in research. Well, now there are 2 significant research studies. One done by myself, one done by Shields. Back in 2008, Shields researched Southern Baptist megachurches, 12 of them, and the graduates that graduated from those churches over the previous 10 years and where they were at that point. And he asked questions based off of their previous youth ministry commitment and then their current church involvement. I did the same thing in 2022. I did the same thing. I published in 2022. I did in the fall of 2021. And I did churches of 500, 2,000 across 4 different denominations across the entire country. And our studies align almost perfectly with one another in the results of the studies. And so You guys are crushing it, and I want to show you the data here in a moment because it'll blow your mind. But before I show you the data, there's a Christian researcher. He's one of the top Christian researchers anywhere. His name's Christian Smith. And Christian Smith, this is back in 2009, Christian Smith talking about these statistics that are out here on kids leaving the church. And it's maybe difficult to see, but I'll try to read it to you here. Now, anyone familiar with my own work knows that I'm deeply concerned about the lives of faith of American teenagers. I agree there is a cause for concern that many churches need to do a much better job of working with the youth than they are currently doing. But I find the misuse of statistics described above, talking about the dropout statistics, if it were an isolated incident, it might be excusable. But having been a watcher of evangelicalism for many years, I know that this is not an aberrant case. Evangelical leaders and organizations routinely use descriptive statistics in sloppy and unwarranted misrepresenting and sometimes absolutely preposterous ways, usually to get attention and sound alarms, at least some of which are false alarms. The widespread influence of much-cited evangelical pollsters who do not actually come entirely clean on their methods does not help matters either. It seems as one of two situations pertains. Either statistics or statistically reckless evangelicals are somewhat aware that they are playing fast and loose with the numbers, or they are not, they simply do not know any better. Either is unacceptable. In the first case, we are talking about intellectual dishonesty and the distortion of what is true in the name of promoting truth. In the second, we are dealing with the elementary ineptitude, gullibility, and irresponsibility conducted in full public view. This is what Orthodox Christianity, assuming that is what it is, has to offer our culture. So let me tell you what's happened. There has not been, over the last 20 years, a conference that I've been to, or there's not been a conference I've been to that a speaker at that conference did not use these statistics as sort of the reason and the solution that he was about to give on how to stop it. Or every book that has been written on youth ministry over the last 20 years also uses these statistics as the reason as to why they wrote the book, and here's what we need to do to reverse it. Does that make sense? Based off of faulty statistics, which is kind of crazy. But I say this as an encouragement to you because I have many friends that are out of youth ministry now who loved youth ministry because they were like, look, if 70-90% of these kids are just going to leave the church after my investment in their life, why in the world should I keep plugging along? And sometimes it can feel that way for you, which I'm going to talk about as we go through. It's going to feel that way for you that, man, am I really making an impact? Am I really making a difference? Is what I'm saying as a leader to these students getting through. It seems like they ignore me. It seems like they don't care. It seems like, man, I've been with this girl for 2 years. I've been with this guy for 2 years. It just seems like it's not getting through. And I'm telling you it's getting through. Like, I promise you it is getting through. And this is what the data shows. In fact, I want to show you the data, and then I want to break down a bit of the data for you, again, as an encouragement to you, but so you know the data, and there's some practical things we can draw from it. And again, it's kind of hard to see, but I'll kind of explain what's happening. Yeah. This is the levels of youth ministry. In fact, turn those down for this for a minute. I think it's worth it. Doesn't matter if you see me anyway. All right. This says levels of youth ministry involvement. Level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. Let me just describe that to you first so you understand what we're talking about here. A level 1, this is a disengaged prospect. This is a person who had no affiliation with youth ministry at all. They were not involved in church or in youth ministry. A level 2, this is a normative attender. This is a person who they come around your student ministry from time to time. You might see them for like 2 or 3 months straight, and then you don't see them for like a month or 2 straight. Then you might see them for a month straight, and you don't see them, or you might see them once a month. They're just that sporadic attender that comes in. They're not super connected. You would probably describe them as like the fringe kid in your student ministry, right? And you guys know who those are. When I say that, you're like, oh yeah, that girl, yeah, I see her. Sometimes I'll see her for a while, then I'll see her for 6 months, or oh yeah, I see her sporadically, maybe once or twice a month. They're kind of sporadic on their attendance. Which, by the way, this is a lot of people in the church in general now. The average church attendance for the average attender in American church is 1.8 times a month. So if you think about that, that is less than half the year the average attender in churches are attending church. And that's why we have churches that talk about how many people they have on their roll, right, their membership roll, but actually how many butts are in the seat, how many people are actually attending the service. It's not the same. Level 3, this is an enthusiastic follower. This is a student that attends your student ministry 2 to 3 times a month. They have a relationship with a leader, some type of a relationship with a youth pastor, like they know each other's name type of situation. Depending on the size of your ministry, this can certainly affect that. They practice some measure of spiritual disciplines, at some level. They don't go to everything in your student ministry, but these kids are going to go to camp most of the time, retreats, things like that. They're going to do some of those type of things. They don't do everything, but they do a lot of things. And then you have your level 4. This is your engaged disciple. This is the kids who are in everything, at everything, a part of everything you do. And you know who those are too. Like when you talk about the shared thing, we're going to the mall and all that type of stuff. You could probably in your head go, these 10 kids I know are going to be there, right? Doesn't matter what we do, these kids are going to be there, whatever those kids are, right? Those are the level 4. Now, this is Shields' study in the retention from Southern Baptist megachurches. This is my study of churches of 500 to 2,000 and even self-identified evangelical churches. And I want you to notice the data. We have no data here in this area because these are disengaged kids. They were never a part of the youth ministry, so the church wouldn't have access to their information anyway. We sent the surveys out, and they filled out questions, which give them a score based off of a scale. And each section of the survey, nothing really matched that. But a level 2, again, the loosely committed kid in your student ministry. The retention rate for Southern Baptist megachurches was 79%. The retention rate for self-identified evangelical churches was 79 point whatever that is. I can't read it. 79 point. I can tell you. 5%. Yeah, something like that. And but here's the idea. The idea is that having 2 parents that believe in Jesus, the retention rate is 80%. So basically, loose level youth ministry commitment has the same level as having 2 parents that believe in Jesus. Now, I'm not suggesting that in a youth ministry is more important than having parents that believe in Jesus or whatever. I would say actually it's important that you have both parents that believe in Jesus and a youth ministry. Like if you have those 2 together, the statistical probability of you walk away from church is basically 0. Like it's non-existent if those 2 categories are in place. But the enthusiastic follower, the retention rate in my study was 94.6%. 94.6%. In my study, their overall retention rate, the level 4 engaged disciple was 98%. The retention rate for Southern Baptist megachurches, and actually I think this was youth ministries better now than it was in 2008 when Shields did the study, was 92.8%. Now, here's what's interesting about this. 98% retention rate. These are people who were involved in these churches over the previous 10 years in their youth ministries. 98% of them were still in the church and walking with Jesus. Now, here's what's interesting about that retention rate. In one of the churches, there were 3 dropouts. If that church was not in my study, the statistical retention rate for that category would have been 99.4%. It is virtually guaranteed that the kids that are engaged deeply in your student ministry are going to be walking with Jesus as an adult. Like guaranteed, which is pretty incredible. So there's also some other nuances to the research. I don't want to get too much more into this, but there's some nuances to it. Like as an example, in both Shields' study and my study, about 65% of people who were level 2s had higher levels as an adults. In other words, they were not only in the church as an adult, those sporadic kids, they were actually serving and more deeply connected in college and as adults than they were when they were in high school. Pretty incredible. So even those fringe kids who you think you might not be getting through to, you're actually getting through to. And you're connecting with them. And it's making a difference in their life. So one quick implication for this, and I'll tell you this from something that I think about, something I train my leaders on in the student ministry that I lead in. I go, hey, I want you to identify, maybe you even take a sheet of paper at some point and you write down the names of all the girls, all the guys that are that you kind of have some influence with. Maybe they're in a small group of yours. Maybe you talk to them on the ministry night or whatever. And maybe just on your own sometime, just write what level you think they're at. I think this kid's a level 2. I think this kid's a level 3. Based on the definitions that Derik gave, this person's a level 4 or whatever. And then make it a part of your job description. Make it a part of your role as a leader to go, okay, what do I need to do to help this kid get from a level 2 to a level 3? What I need to do to help this kid get from a level 3 to a level 4? Because I know that if I can help disciple that kid to the next step, if I can help move them forward down this, it obviously increases the probability that they're going to be walking with Jesus as an adult. Does that make sense? Really important. Really important. In fact, I'm going to put this, before I put this up, let me also say this. I'm not a huge fan now that I spent about 4 years of my life diving deep into all of these sort of statistical research and all this mess. I'm not a huge fan of these doom and gloom statistics, and I've never been. I've never experienced all these kids leaving my church, and I'm like, am I just super youth pastor? No, because none of my friends ever experienced that as well. But let me say this about it. I also believe what Matthew 16 says when Jesus says, on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. The church is not going to die. It's not going away. It's not going anywhere. In fact, I believe that the church is taking more territory than it's losing territory. And we're seeing that all over the world. Revival breaking out in all types of places all over the world. And revival in ways has been breaking out even here in the U.S. And people have opinions about stuff, and I'm not trying to have a debate or whatever. But I mean, we had the Asbury situation that happened about a year ago. I am speaking at camps and retreats, and I'm seeing a move of God happen with these Gen Zers that is actually just, it's blowing my mind. About a month and a half ago, we did our winter retreat with our students, and I'm telling you, God showed up in one of the services that we had. And this is up to this point, we had 26 kids get saved on this weekend before this happened. God showed up and just arrested a time of worship that we had. The speaker who was set to speak that night, he was like, I can't even speak. Like, it was just this move of God that happened. We had kids bawling their eyes out, kids confessing sin, kids just surrendering their life to Jesus, kids just, praying. And there was like this sort of unprepared, unplanned prayer time for about 3 hours on that Saturday evening. It was unbelievable. One of those, like, man, I have these handful of ministry experiences that you're just like, dude, God just, there is no manufacturing. God showed up and did something incredible. Does that make sense? And God's doing some cool stuff in this generation. And I'm sure you guys are seeing it, but I'm telling you, it's what's happening. And this is sort of the sentiment across the country in youth ministry right now, that we're in a really incredible time right now of youth ministry where things are happening. But also research is sort of backing up this idea, even outside of youth ministry research. A recent study found that while 80% of those raised in Protestant in the U.S. continue to identify as Protestant in adulthood, only 60% of those raised in non-religious kept away from religion when they grew up, many of them converting to Christianity. So I want you to think about this. Actually, the statistics show us that when kids grow up in homes where both parents don't believe in Jesus or have any religious affiliation, there's actually a higher probability that when they become adults, they are seeking that out to find that somewhere. The 60% of them are converting, most to Christianity, and the second most is Islam. Those are the two top sort of categories that they're converting into. But people who grew up in homes where their parents are atheists, agnostic, non-religious, the religious nuns that if you've been around church for a while, you've heard that sort of phrase. In fact, I would say even go pre-2020, back it up 2010 to 2020, the religious nuns was the conversation of the church. I even spoke at a couple of conferences over that time frame on how to reach the religious nuns. And the idea behind the religious nuns were the people who checked the religious non-affiliated, that group had grown more than it ever had in history. But the product of that now, what we're seeing is actually there's sort of a pendulum swing back in the other direction, which should be encouraging to churches. We shouldn't be thinking about it in a doom and gloom way. In fact, here's what Veritas research said. They said in the next 40 years, Christianity is set to remain as the world's largest belief system, claiming 32% of the global population. It ain't going anywhere. We're not losing ground. A 1% increase over its current share. So actually, Christianity is increasing, not decreasing. Meanwhile, a portion of humanity that does not identify with any particular religion, including atheists, agnostic, and nuns, religious nuns, is set to decline from 16% to 13%. So actually, this number that was the highest it had ever been is actually now plateaued and is actually going in the other direction. So actually, the atheists and the agnostic and these people, they're actually the ones that are losing ground when it comes to this idea. So I say this because to encourage you to say what you do matters and it's having a massive impact, and the church ain't going anywhere. And we get an opportunity right now, in my opinion, after doing youth ministry with sort of 3 different generations of students. This is the most receptive generation that I have ever seen, that I have ever been a part of, I have ever ministered to. They are the most receptive. In fact, Barna just came out with a massive global study across globally, and they called the study the open generation. The open generation. Because they are open to these conversations. They are open to belief. They're open to Christianity. There's not as much of a hostility towards the conversation. Does that make sense? And so this is hopefully an encouragement and some good news for you guys as well as you're thinking about youth ministry. So don't, and I know there's struggles. I know there's times when we have our girls, we have our guys, we see what's going on with them, and you're like, do they get it? Do they whatever? And I want this to be a bit of an encouragement to you to say, listen, they're getting way more than you think that they're getting. And it does matter. And I didn't get saved until I was a senior in high school. I was the biggest drug dealer in my high school. I was an absolute disaster. I wouldn't have to do God, church, anything. I remember when I was like in middle school, I remember going to a student ministry for a short period of time. And I remember this like 70-year-old man who would always come and talk to me. And he would, and I just would ignore him. I would just kind of, I would treat him poorly, all this stuff. I'd hang out with my friends, all that stuff. But he was relentless. Every week he would come and talk to me. His name was Gilbert. And Gilbert would come up to me and talk to me every time. Like every week I was there. And he would talk to my friends and all this type of stuff. I remember specifically, I'm 42 years old and I remember this. I'm like 12 at the time, 13 at the time. I remember me and one of my friends arguing with him on why baptism was stupid. I remember that vividly, this conversation. I can visualize the spot where it was at that, it was outside at this particular church, like the exact spot. I didn't want to believe outside. I didn't get saved until 5 years after that. I got saved 5 years after that. Hadn't been to church in probably that same amount of time. And I go to this church and this dude remembered me. Now, I ended up my senior high school getting called into ministry after I got saved. I started doing research. I knew I wanted to do youth ministry. I go to Liberty to study youth ministry because their program was awesome. So I go to study youth ministry. While I was there, I was doing a bunch of ministry. And that church that I went to my senior year of high school called me and said, hey, we got an opening in our youth ministry. Would you want to come and be our student pastor? And that church hired me as a student pastor. I then served as a student pastor of that church. That's the church that had the 12 kids and went to 9 kids. I served as a student pastor of that church for 6 years. And Gilbert Hines in his 80s served with me every single year. And I got to serve with this man who had this conversation with me back when I was 12 years old. Kind of funny, huh? But to this day, as a 42-year-old man, I go, Gilbert Hines had such a profound impact on my life. And I wasn't even like engaged. I wasn't even paying attention. And the little things that he was saying to me later on, just like I would think about them from time to time. Like they got through the callousness of my heart and where I was at. And God, the Holy Spirit, use those conversations and use different things to do that. So I just want to encourage you with, man, what you do matters. It's making a massive impact. These kids that you're leading, they're going to be walking with Jesus as an adult because of you pointing them to him and helping them walk with Jesus in a deeper way right now. And that's significant. All right, you can turn the lights back a little for me if you don't mind. Or at least turn them up a little bit. Now, hopefully that's an encouragement to you. Before I go any further, anybody got any questions or comments or thoughts about that?
That's an interesting thought because, we've dealt with and heard that statistics and talked about it like it was hard and fast. Yeah.
I will say
Is so entrenched in youth ministry culture. Like I'll talk to youth pastors and they look at me like I'm crazy. Like, wait a minute. I said, okay, cool. Here, check out the research.
right.
You know what I'm saying? And when you go and you dig into it, you're like, whoa. Yeah, good.
Well, like human psychology, right?
Yeah.
We should not be fooled by something so absurd as to say. My own personal experience, not so dramatic, but yeah, we're on the fringes, and it's just, it goes to show when people don't think past the next week, they don't understand, like you said, people leave that area, maybe move across state lines, and they're off your radar. Don't make a statistic off of something you don't understand.
Yeah, I'll tell you, this is, and I'm not going to tell you who did it, but I'll tell you this is what one of the pollsters, this is what they did when they came up with these statistics. This is what they did. They would call people and say, hey, you mind taking a 5-minute survey or whatever? And they'd say, oh, yeah, no problem. And say, hey, did you go to church when you were in high school? Did you ever go to church when you were in high school? Yeah. You go to church now? No. They went, they dropped out. You didn't ask them, how involved are they in church? They come on Easter Sunday, they come with a friend one time, they whatever. You get what I'm saying? So I do believe that there was, and again, there's only a handful of these, like less than 10. I would say really less than 5. And if you go and kind of break it down, 4 of the studies come from 2 organizations. And both of those organizations sell a lot of material. You know what I'm saying? So I'm just, you know what I mean? But yeah, it's a concerning deal, but this is, you know, in the culture. And I would say this, one of the things that youth pastors, youth ministers, well, I'll say they'll do is they'll go, we need to reconceptualize youth ministry. We need to figure out how to do it better. We need to figure out how to do this. We need to figure out how to do this. Why don't we reconceptualize something that works? Right. Like we should be like, this works. Like, what are we talking about here? And 2 years ago at, and again, I don't mind. I mean, I've had these conversations with them, so I'm not. 2 years ago at the Youth Pastors Summit down in Florida, Greg Steer, who leads Dare to Share, he gets up on the stage, and this is the first thing he says out of his mouth to 3,000 youth pastors. He says this. He says, "Youth ministry has failed," and that's what he starts with. And then he goes to this whole thing. And it's like, but he's basing that idea off of what he knows, and what he knows is the literature is littered with. Why would he think that they're lying? Or why would he think they're being deceptive? And I don't know if they're intentionally being deceptive. It's just deceptive. It's just not reality. Does that make sense? So it's kind of a crazy thing. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have any, I'm really excited to hear what you're sharing, by the way, because I've heard that a lot.
Yep.
So this is thrilling information to me. Do you have any insights on, so I don't know how to even word the question. So students are not leaving at the rates we've been told, but what about their worldview?
So for one, they're not, and I want to make this clear, they're not only not leaving, they are actually more involved as adults than they were when they were students. And that is even now, what we do see in the literature is 18 to 22 years old when they're in college. There is a bit of unrest there. But I don't make much of it, because the more I've dug into it, the more I realize is that, yeah, but it is the most transient time of their life. They're going to college, they're coming home for 3 months, they're, you know, for summer, they're going back, coming back for a month for Christmas. Like, you know, they're, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's just that there's a I think it's more impacted by season of life than it is necessarily like they're straying away from it. And I'm going to come back to your question. I also think that because there's been a lot of conversation around faith deconstruction, I think the reason why that conversation has been so big is because there's been a couple of famous people that have come out with faith deconstruction stories. But I don't think it's this pervasive thing that is happening in our culture where all these people are deconstructing. I don't think it's a massive situation. I think we're making a mountain out of a molehill situation. But as a church, we see this problem. We definitely need to address it and find out great ways to do it. And the best book on faith deconstruction was just written actually by one of the professors at Liberty with another guy in Raleigh, and they're incredible, and they did a great job on it. But I don't think it's a sort of a massive deal. But here's what I would say about, and we'll talk about this more as we kind of go along. I would say that when it comes to worldview, we as ministry leaders are trying to establish them that is built off of the Word of God. And that becomes the filter as to how they view the world, right? And we want, so their life needs to align with the Word of God, their theology, their whatever. We know that kids are biblically illiterate and adults are biblically illiterate. They go 1.8 times a month to church, and they don't read their Bibles, and they don't give, and they don't serve. I'm not talking about you guys, but you know what I'm saying. This is the average attender at churches, right? And these kids see their parents modeling this type of stuff, right? And so, but what and again, it's hard for me to say because I'm at Liberty, where these kids are on fire for Jesus, and their worldview is aligning with Scripture or whatever. But I also have a pretty good pulse on what's going on in other places. And I mean, you can go and look up this stuff. I mean, people are getting saved like crazy, like Alabama and Auburn and like these different public UGA, these universities. I mean, they're baptizing hundreds of people through their campus ministries on their campuses. Like in the last year. Like, it's insane, like, stuff that's happening at these schools. And I think that what changes a kid's worldview is they have an encounter with the Lord. God, the Holy Spirit, takes up residence in their life, and God, the Holy Spirit, gives them conviction and all of that. I would say that sometimes we overplay some things, but sometimes we recognize there's some things there. So, like, I'll give you an example of something. So let's just take the LGBTQIA+ stuff that we were talking about earlier. Let's just take that as an example. What I find to be true is that Gen Zers are much more loving and caring and interacting with people that are in that community because they've grown up with them in their community, with their school system and everybody else being very accepting of that. It doesn't mean that they agree with their lifestyle, but they understand it differently than we do. Because when I was in high school, if you were gay, you got beat up. You know what I'm saying? So it's kind of a different deal. So I'll give you an example. I got a guy who's in one of my classes right now. He's studying ministry right now. This guy, so here's his story. He set up a meeting at the beginning of this semester. He's a freshman at Liberty. He's like, hey, I want to tell you my story. So here's his story. He grew up in a home, bit chaotic, kind of different stuff going on. He said he got bullied a lot when he was like 4th, 5th grade, 6th grade by the boys. And because he was smaller and he was, not as like rough as they were or whatever. So in 7th grade, he said, I just was like, hey, I'm just attracted to boys. All my friends are girls and they're attracted to boys. And they talked about their attraction to boys and liking boys. So I started liking boys. And so in 7th grade, I started telling everybody I was gay. In 8th grade, I realized, you know what, I'm not just gay, but I'm actually one of the girls. He's like, so I started dressing like a girl. My parents, my grandparents, everybody fully encouraged me, accepted me. When I was in 9th grade, my parents and my grandparents allowed me to start taking puberty blockers and hormones and all this type of stuff. And through his entire high school year, he fully transitioned to a girl, and his name was Emma, and everybody called him Emma at his high school and all this type of stuff. All right, here's this guy's story. He said, in high school, I tried to kill myself 4 times and was not successful. He said, I got out of high school. I'm living as Emma. I legally changed his name, like through the court system and everything, dressing like her, the whole deal. And he said that, so I'm 19 years old and I am at this desperate place. He said, I had this one girl who was a friend of mine, who he called his best friend. And he said, she went to church and she was a Christian. And she always told me that she loved me. She didn't agree with my deal, but she loved me. She was there for me if I ever wanted to talk. We hung out all the time. We spent time together on stuff. I said, I want you to think about this in your church environment. I was thinking about parents of your church telling your kids, go hang out with those kids that are the transgender kids. Show them the love of Jesus. I promise you, that's not happening to 99% of parents at any church. Like this, I'm thinking about this, right? I have kids. You know what I'm saying? When I tell my kids to do this, right? Because I'm trying to insulate my kids from this type of reality in life and all this type of stuff, right? And this girl, she said, he said that she would have him over to her house and she would talk, and she would just throughout high school talk to him about Jesus, talk to him about different things. She would invite him to church and he would never go, but she would just talk to him or whatever. So he's 19 years old. And he calls her up and he's like, I'm just in a bad spot. She's like, let me come over. She comes over to his house. She started talking about Jesus, all this type of stuff. And he said for the next 6 months, she was there for me. She prayed with me. She talked to me. She told me about Jesus. And then she led me to Jesus. He's like, and then he goes, and dude, the moment I surrendered my life to Jesus, the Holy Spirit took everything away. I no longer desire to be a woman. I no longer desire to be with men. I no longer, and he goes to this whole, like he's in my office telling me this, you know what I'm saying? And he said this, he said, and now, like if I was looking at him, like it'd be like, I'm looking at one of you men. Like he's dressed, I mean, I would never know. I would never know. He's like, I legally changed my name back. I went through the whole process. I got off the hormones. And he said, and when I did, my entire world rejected me except for the church. My parents kicked me out of the house. My grandparents are like, you're lying to yourself because they're not Christians. They don't want any part of that world. They would much rather affirm him as a woman than they would affirm him as a Christian. And I said, what was it like for you? I said, what was it like for you to make that decision to surrender to Jesus? And he said this. He said, it was like death. It was like dying. And the first thought that came to my mind was when Jesus says, anyone wants to be my disciple must take up his cross and follow me. You know what I'm saying? Like, that was the first thing he said. It was like a death because I lost everything to follow follow Jesus because everybody turned on me except for this girl, you know what I'm saying? But I tell you that story because I just think that I think God the Holy Spirit's role in that is a big work in people's heart and life. And so our role as ministry leaders is let's give them Jesus. Let Jesus begin to change their heart. And as we point them into the Word, they begin to grow in the Word. And I'm going to give you some stuff a little bit later, a bit more practical on that as well, that will, you know, maybe help sort of guide students and stuff like that. Especially if you're like a small group leader or something like that. I have some job descriptions I give to my small group leaders, which I'll tell you later, and what they are, and they're easy to remember. Hey, here's the job description you have. And I think these things really help about worldview conversation. Well, here's what I'm saying. I think sometimes we look at kids now and we go, oh, they have a worldview problem. Sometimes they don't. It's not that they have a worldview problem. It's that they've grown up in it. So the way they engage with it is just different than we engage with it.
Mm-hmm.
They don't necessarily agree with what those kids are doing, but they'll still love that kid who's doing it. Does that make sense? And so we have to be careful as older people who come from a different generation to go, it's a worldview thing. It's kind of like, yeah, to them, it's just the world they grew up in. Like the high school down the road from Liberty that my daughter will go to. Like, there are, they have litter boxes in a couple classrooms because there's a couple kids who are furries and think they're cats, right? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And, and this is real life in public schools now, you know what I'm saying? But our Christian kids are growing up in these schools and they're not compromising the gospel, their faith, and that type of stuff. But they're also growing up with it when they walk around the halls, everybody's affirming it and accepting it. So it's not that they become affirming, but they've learned how to kind of walk the line of being loving to that person and having a relationship with them, but then also kind of like if you're walking up to a homeless person on the street and they're a drug dealer or something like that, and you're just going to go share the gospel with them. Like you're, hey, what's up, man? And they have a friend, they don't have this repulsed attitude towards them. They have this sort of different attitude towards them. You know what I'm saying? So that's what I'm seeing more of. Yeah.
I was just gonna say the word that my daughter uses a lot is tolerance. Yeah, that's the word. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna ostracize you. Even when she was younger, she was like, Mom, I don't understand why people, for people who are in the LGBTQ community, she said, Jesus tells us to love them.
Yeah.
Why are they not loving them?
Yeah.
But you're right. They've grown up with this sense of tolerance. I'm not gonna shun everybody. I'm going to listen. And but then I'm also gonna tell you my side of the story.
That's
So,
right.
yeah.
That's exactly right. And
Mhm.
that I see it more like that than I do the other way.
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying? Like then I see it their views aren't changing about it. They just have to know how to navigate through how they think about like ministry in that context. You know what I'm saying? Because really they're contextualizing ministry to the people that they're around. But we have to help them with that. And we have to undergird what they're talking about with truth and biblical truth. We have to show them what the scripture does teach, because I have students of liberty sometimes. Yeah, the Bible doesn't say anything about homosexuality. I said, doesn't? And they're like, no. I'm like, all right, cool. I pull my Bible out, you know what I'm saying? And I open it up and I say, read this right here. And I said, what does that say? You know what I'm saying? And then they go, oh, I didn't know that. I said, who told you that? Stop getting your theology from TikTok, man. Read the Bible. You know what I'm saying? Or whatever, right? And so I think those are important conversations to have, right? All right. So here we go. How well do you know students in today's culture? Now we're gonna have a little fun. We'll make this interactive, all right? So here's what I want you to do. Okay, let me tell you. Before I tell you what I want you to do, here's what I want you to do. No, I'm gonna do it like this. I'm gonna put some questions on the screen that high school and middle school kids were surveyed on. And I want you to tell me how you think that the students responded. All right? So make sure we're clear here. Pretend that I just surveyed the kids of your youth ministry. And then now I'm saying, all right, I'm going to tell you the question I just surveyed them on, and I want you to tell me how you think they responded. All right, not how you would respond, but how you think they would respond. All right, so here we go. Maybe dim that just a bit. All right, you ready? Question number one. All right, question one. How do you prefer to communicate with someone, in person or by text messaging? All right, so I want you to think about how students would have responded. So if you think that they would have said, In person, raise your hand. Okay, do it. All right, if you think by text messaging, raise your hand. All right, the rest of you. All right. When you think of the future, what emotion do you mainly experience? Excitement or worry? How many of you guys would say that the students would have said excitement? How many of you guys think the students would have said worry? Okay, all right, cool. When I am in school, I mostly feel positive or overwhelmed. How many would say positive? Think that the students would say positive. How many think the students would say overwhelmed? All right. Parents or friends, let's see. Oh yeah. Who would you say has the most influence on your life? How would the students respond? Parents or friends? Who thinks they would say parents? Raise your hand. Who thinks they would say friends? All right. What do you believe is the most important problem facing America? All right. Race relations, sexual identity and orientation, or terrorism. All right. Now I want you to think about the order. All right. So who would say you think they would have said the number one problem facing America is race relations? Raise your hand. All right. One. Who would say sexual orientation, identity, whatever? All right. Who would say terrorism? All right. Cool. All right. What is the hardest part about being a Christian at my school? Fear of what others think or unsure how to represent my faith? Fear what, who thinks students would have said fear of what others think? Who thinks unsure how to represent my faith? About 50-50. All right. All right. Now, there was this massive study that was done. And this is incredible. What they did is they went and they researched. It's a camp. It's called Never the Same Camps. And they have camps all over the country. They have them in, they're in California, they're in North Carolina, they're in South Carolina, they're in New York. They're in Indiana, they're everywhere, all over the country. And what they did is in their morning sessions, they gave students, surveys, and they had them answer all these questions. Every morning. There were like 1,000 questions these kids answered. And there were questions like this. These are actually questions from the survey. And they asked them these type of questions. But then they also asked them questions about how important is the church in your life? Like somewhat important, moderately important, very important, whatever, right? They asked them questions about their spiritual disciplines, their personal life, things they interacted with, how much time they read the Bible. All types of questions they asked them, right? And then what they did is in the leaders meeting, they had the leaders do the survey as well and answer the survey how they thought that the students would answer them. And what is incredibly profound is that there was a massive disconnect between what the students said and what the leaders said. All right? And so let me show you what they said. How do you prefer to communicate with someone? 71% said they prefer in person. While most leaders, which is all of you, but pastor's life, said by text. So what does that tell us? The students want face-to-face interaction. They want conversations. We think that they're like this and this is all they care about. This is not all they care about. Watch how they are with their friends on their ministry night. I talk to small group leaders sometimes, and we can talk about this later. I can give you some strategy if this is happening for you. But this happens sometimes. I'm a small group leader. I was doing a training thing earlier this week, and someone asked me this question. They said, I can't get the girls to talk in my group. I can't get the girls to talk in my group. I can't get the guys to talk in my group or whatever. They just don't talk. My group doesn't talk because they just don't talk. They're just more introverted kids on type of stuff. Okay, cool. Here's what I want you to do. On the student ministry night, I want you to watch them when they're not in the group. And they're like, it's not that they don't talk. It's that they don't talk in your group. So then you got to ask yourself the question, why then are they not talking in the group? It's not that they're introverted, quiet, they don't talk, they don't want to interact. There is something that is stopping them from doing that. Because when they are free and they're with their friends, they won't shut up. You get what I'm saying? So sometimes we can have a perception about something that doesn't align with reality. And this is a way that it is. When you think about the future, what emotion do you mainly experience, excitement or worry? Most students said excitement when they think about their future, while most leaders, like you guys just did, said that they would be worried about their future. When I'm at school, I mostly feel positive or overwhelmed. Students overwhelmingly said positive, while adults overwhelmingly said overwhelmed. What would you say who has the most influence on your life? Most students said their parents have way more influence on their life than their friends do. While most leaders, like you guys did, agreed that their friends would have the most influence on their life. What do you believe is the most important problem facing America? actually the order was terrorism was number one. Number two was race relations, and number three was sexual identity. And they had a list of like 10 things on here. I just picked out a few of them on here. Leaders were the opposite, the complete opposite. What is the hardest part about being a Christian at my school? Fear of what others think or unsure how to represent my faith. Most students said unsure how to represent my faith, while most leaders said, like we did in here, fear of what others might think. They're more afraid of what for them, they're basically saying, if I knew how to do it, I would do it more. It's not the fear that's stopping me from doing it. It's the unsure of how to do it. So that's a discipleship problem. That's a problem with us as leaders, not a problem with the students. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And so here's some key observations from this massive study that they did. Adults are not as optimistic, but students in almost every single question were mostly optimistic. So oftentimes what happens is, as leaders and adults, we can view students and where they're at, and we can be like, they're depressed, they're anxious, they're this, they're this, they're this. And we have this negative view towards their actual reality when they view their actual reality in a much more positive way. And this is important because how we lead them is impacted by how we think about them. If we think certain things about them, we're going to lead them in certain ways that we wouldn't lead them in if we thought differently about them. How important is church to you in your overall experience? 70.79% of the students said it's very important, while leaders only 25% said that of the leaders agreed. Most of the students think church is very important, somewhat important, not important at all. Do you believe that your generation is perceived accurately by adults? 78% of adults said the students would say no. 71% of students said yes. They're positive. They think you guys think positively. All right. I'm not saying you don't. 77% said faith was strong or very strong. But most adults said the students would see their faith as weak. Yes, and hey, how would you see your faith? As strong, very strong, somewhat strong, a little, weak, whatever. Most of the adults said that they thought their students would see their faith as weak, but their students actually, most of them were in the category they saw their faith as strong or very strong. You get what I'm saying? So I'm showing you this because one of the first things that we talk about when it comes to like communication, I teach a homiletic preaching class at Liberty. You got to know your audience. You got to know the people that you're communicating with. Sometimes I think a barrier to discipling kids in our churches is our leadership. Our leadership becomes the lid to what happens in their personal life because they're ready. They want more. They want to be pushed. They want the bar to be raised. They see themselves as stronger than you see them, and they want it. They want that extra push. They want that extra whatever, but they don't know what that extra is because we're just kind of giving them kind of the cupcake, kind of stuff. And it's like, no, like push them, like challenge them, like talk to them, like engage them and give them more. You know what I mean? And I think this is an important deal. So what do we need to do as a result of this? We lead with higher expectations. We have to lead with higher expectations. We have to lead with higher expectations. This is how I lead student ministry and how I've been leading student ministry now for like 15 years. I lead with high expectations. I'll give you an example of these. Well, you don't know the sort of the formatting of it, but I'll kind of explain in this. Like if you want to be on our worship team, if you want to serve in the kids ministry, if you want to like whatever it is, like if you want to serve or you want to have some level of leadership, then you must be in a life group. Now we do groups in two ways. We have two types of groups. A life group for a high school student is a 2-hour group that meets on Sunday afternoon evenings in homes. That's what it is. It's not our student ministry night. They break out these little groups we call connection groups. It's not that. You must be in a life group. You can be the best drummer in our church and you're not drumming on my student ministry stage if you're not in a life group. Now here's how we do it. We actually close these groups. We actually announce it from stage like this. If you want to be on our, if you want to be, if you're here, you want to go deeper in your relationship with God, you want to get serious about who He is. If you want to get victory over the sin that you have in your life, you want to be pushed in your faith, then you need to sign up for a life group. We open signups in August, and we shut them down in September, and no new kids can come in for the rest of that semester. Then we open them up in January to do the thing. And here's what we do. We say it to them. We say, listen, and from the stage, I'll tell the students, I'll say, hey, listen, if you're here and you don't want somebody to ask you how many times you're in the Word this week, don't sign up for these groups because we're going to ask you. And let me tell you what happens. the students in your ministry that are stronger are like finally something for me. They rise to the bar of what you said. And then they join in, and you've already told them it's going to be serious, and then they actually get discipled deeper. They get serious or whatever, and then these kids kind of become an engine to your ministry. That is an example of it, but I think we have to lead with higher expectations. We have to challenge these students with a different expectation. If we think lowly of them, we're going to lead them lowly. Let's think more highly of them and lead them, and that'll affect the way we lead them. I was reading this, this is a couple years ago, but I filed this away because I was like, this sentiment is a sentiment I get all the time. And I saw it and I was like, this guy puts it in words better than I could explain it. But the youth ministry article that I was reading was this article, and the article was talking about how students these days are just different. They're distracted. They're on their phones all the time. The shorter the video, the better. Their attention spans, whatever. You can't preach to students for 25, 30 minutes anymore. You need to preach to students for 10 minutes, maybe 12 minutes. You need to, and it was kind of all this type of stuff. Here's how you engage students and how you engage them differently or whatever. Now, when we start talking about this, I'll tell you why it bothers me. Because we have high school kids that are sitting in AP Calculus BC for an hour every single day in their high school, and we're saying they can't handle the Word of God for 30 minutes. Like, that blows my mind. Like, it really blows my mind that we have that perception of the way the students are. So I'm reading through this article, and I'll be honest with you, this article is in a major youth ministry publication, or ministry publication. And I'm reading this article, and I'm like, man, I couldn't disagree with more. Because I'm leading a ministry right now that is busting at the seams, and we challenge these kids. So anyways, I get to the end of it, and just like with YouTube videos or articles, or they have like the comments. Those comments that go underneath it, you know what I'm saying? Like where people comment. And a high school kid, 16-year-old high school kid, responded to this article. And I'll show you what he said. Oh, that's gonna be hard to read. I'll read it from my computer. It's gonna be hard to read here, too small. All right. He says this: you accurately describe the youth of this generation, but you falsely describe what the youth want in their youth pastor. Few will admit it, but youth want a youth pastor to stop watering down the message of the gospel. The youth want true truth, just like it's taught to anyone with a mind and a soul. The youth want faith and repentance and the gospel explicitly defined and communicated with no reservations or apologies. The youth want to be challenged to meet God's standards of truth and not whatever the youth pastor thinks we can handle at the time. We're already vastly underestimated by the school system that treats us like a bunch of hormone-filled, terrible, rotten kids. And that it's inevitable that we will make the mistakes that we do, because that's just the nature of who we are. We hate that false gospel, and we want God's gospel. Honestly, if youth pastors would stop doing these two things, youth ministry will cease to be bad, and it would change the churches of the church youth of our world. Number one, stop watering down the gospel. We can handle it even if you don't think so. No, ask Jesus into your heart. Recite some prayer. That's not real change. Stop lowering our expectations. Stop lowering. I can't read anymore. Here we go. Stop lowering the expectations, and please challenge us to live up to the standard of God, not the standard you think we're capable of meeting. We can handle it even if you don't think so. And this one's extra. Stop listening to us and start listening to the Bible. Because the biggest sign of a weak youth pastor is the one who is willing to compromise his message to tickle the ears of teenagers. Honestly, I'm leaving the room and never coming back if a youth pastor lowers his standards to meet mine. I want to hear a message from God, not a message lower to the standards of lower to the fancies of men, much less teenage boys.
Amen.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? Now, all right. So I think, obviously, for a student to be reading stuff on, youth pastors' sites, this student, the 60-year-old, is probably a level 4, more of a deeper disciple and all this type of stuff, right? Yeah. But I think it's an interesting perspective that this student has. You know what I'm saying? An interesting perspective that, man, we need a challenge. We need to challenge students. And I talk about this. Were you at the thing on Tuesday night with the Shane?
supposed to be.
I mentioned this in there, and I'll show you this because I think this is, I think about this from a discipleship standpoint. I think this is important from a discipleship standpoint. Then maybe I can take a break after this.
Yes.
Right. So there is, there's a thing called the Ingalls scale, and the Ingalls scale is basically like, a way to sort of describe where people are on their spiritual journey, right? And everybody's at a different place on their spiritual journey. And I'm gonna just give you sort of a rough understanding of it versus explaining the whole thing to you. But it might be something like this. A -7, this would be someone who's like, they're a Satan worshiper. Like they worship Satan, they want nothing to do with God, whatever, like they're just anti-Jesus, anti-Bible, whatever. Then, maybe like a -8, this would be like, they're a persecutor of Christians, they kill Christians, they're seeking out Christians to execute them or whatever, right? A -5, this might be like an atheist, right? A -4, this might be like an agnostic, you know what I'm saying? And the 0 point, this is the salvation mark. This is when a person surrenders their life to Jesus. So a -1, and the idea is like these people are kind of further away from God or from salvation, right? Depending on their story or whatever. A -1, this could be a list of kids. This could be that student came and they were a -5 2 months ago, but as they've been coming, God bless them, working on their heart, you've been building relationships with them, whatever. They're -1, they're close to surrendering their life to Jesus. You have people in your ministry at times, and you're like, dude, that kid's close. You know what I mean? This could also be a kid who's been in your church for his whole life, and they think they're Christians, but they're not. And they're close. They know Bible verses. They're around your church. They're apathetic. They're all that type of stuff. But many on that day will say to me, Lord, Lord, depart from me. I never knew you. Like they were close. They've done things in the name of Jesus, but they've never repented of their sins, put their trust and faith in Jesus. There's kids that got saved. And then the 1, this would be like they got baptized. They're started attending youth ministry regularly. This is like now they're in a small group. They're practicing spiritual disciplines. They're reading their Bible. They're praying, whatever, right? Like a 5, this is like, they're like a level, they're like in it, they're like growing, they're pursuing Jesus, they're sharing the gospel with people, like they're kind of deeper in their faith, like this is like the Apostle Paul, right? So that's kind of a breakdown. Does that make sense? Here's what I think to be true. I think in general, most youth ministries do a fantastic job with this group of people right here. This to me is like the youth ministry sweet spot. That's what it is right there. That's the youth ministry sweet spot. We do a good job helping connect lost kids to the church, reach them, build relationships with them, all that type of stuff. We do a good job at helping them navigate salvation. We do a good job of getting them dunked in the tank on Sunday mornings or whatever we do. We do a good job at helping them start a relationship with Jesus, get in a small group, start, practicing spiritual disciplines, reading their Bible, prayer, and stuff like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Let me tell you where I think youth ministry is the weakest. Youth ministry is the weakest with this group of people right here. That's the weakest. And I would say that these students here actually become the engine to reach these students here. Mm-hmm. So like sometimes youth pastors, I used to say this, I would say stupid things like this. I would say, hey, if all of you would just bring one friend, like our student ministry would double next week. You know what I'm saying? That's not how youth ministries grow. How youth ministries grow, and this has happened in every circumstance, in every case. My first church, I told you we had 9 kids, 12 kids, or whatever. In the first year, student ministry grew to about 25 kids or so. And one of the girls that we reached in our student ministry is a girl named Alex. Alex started to come every week, and she was on the soccer team. She got saved, God radically changed her life, and she's like, I want to reach my soccer team. She starts inviting all these girls from her soccer team that would come, who were lost in church, all this type of stuff. Next thing you know, we got like 13 soccer girls that are coming every single week to our student ministry. What do you think followed the 13 soccer girls? All the dudes that liked all the 13 soccer girls. And then they started coming to hang out with the girls who were there. Our student ministry grew about 50 kids because of one student, like in a year, like easy, maybe 6 months. And I say that to you because that's typically what happens. A couple students get fired up for Jesus. And so you have to have an engine down here that creates this so that it'll take students here. Now, this is a side comment, but I think an important one. Students on this side of salvation can grow in leaps. And you see it in your church. Like, they go from atheist to saved. They go from agnostic, which is me, to saved, right? Like, they can jump in leaps. But once they get here, they grow in steps. And so we as ministry leaders have to help them grow in steps. They're all at different places on their spiritual journey. And my role as a ministry leader or a youth pastor or a volunteer or a small group leader, whatever, my job is to help find out where they're at on their spiritual journey and help lead them into a growing relationship with Jesus. If they're a 1, I'm trying to help them be a 2. If they're a 2, I'm trying to help them be a 3. If they're a 3, I'm trying to help them be a 4. If they're a -4, I'm trying to help them be a 0 with everything that I have, right? I'm trying to pour into them, invest in them, right? And that takes a bit of a different strategy depending on which grade that you're looking at and thinking about. But it's important from a discipleship standpoint like that. So I think it is important that we don't neglect this group right here because they become such an important part of this. I think things going and sharing the gospel, taking those students to go to the mall and do stuff like that, telling stories about, hey, we went here and this is what happened. We got to, like that type of stuff. Dude, you got to tell your students that type of stuff and show them that type of stuff and let them be a part of that because it really solidifies some things in them when it comes to the gospel and to the gospel ministry. All right.
All right, guys, y'all getting something out of this, by the way?
Yes, thank you.
That's so good. So we're gonna go ahead and take a break. So if you guys gotta use the bathroom, anything like that, we actually have lunch outside as well. So for the next 30 minutes until 12:30, we can just kind of hang out, chat. If you want to talk to Derik, you'll have access to him. And then at 12:30, we'll start worship, and then we will start session 2. All right, so y'all are free to go until 12:30. We got sandwiches and box lunches outside.
Do you said like their life groups? Do you guys have what you're doing as like D groups? Yes. Kind of thing.
Behind your coat.
But we do that. You want to serve, you have to. Yeah. I like that.
Not room for more push-up contest and a plank contest, and you're gonna get watch Mr. Man, this kind of group is, let's go. You know what I'm saying? And guys, we're having fun, class, and they're goofing off and all that stuff. Make a larger group go small, connect every student to a leader, build relationships. You keep awake over there, Maureen?
Yes, I am. This is good
How-
stuff. You must love this because this is all.
You never have one
Yes.
for any reason. Hey, and actually, when it comes to groups, the smaller the better. It's like the best group is like, give me that. And I have 2 leaders every group. Yeah, so it is 2 leaders, 3 students. That's the best. That's the best. Yeah. Like the smaller the better. Sometimes we start going, oh man, my group's not doing good. There's only 3 girls coming. It's like, yo, you got 3 girls coming? You go way deeper with 3 girls than you can with 8. Now I got 8 I gotta deal with. I got 8, I gotta figure out where they're at, and they're all in different places and they're leading differently. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Sometimes big is not that big, you know, discipleship, right? You know, so yeah. That's how I think.
Love to talk to you more
Yeah.
about that.
Yep.
I'm gonna try to ask it for you.
No, yeah.
First, I wanted to
And if,
mention.
and if it's a good one, then I think it's good for everybody. Like the whole last session.
Yeah. Well, first I just want to mention is I'm very there's Christine down there this week out there. And it must have been, yeah, it must have been love to faith. My dad is love to faith. A bunch of my friends that I grew up with are also in school. Unitarian, church. So many. It feels like we growth. So many of them are left to faith. So many of them are like good relationships now, where they're just integrated. I have some friends that are literally adopted every something.
Right. Right.
Literally, I have like
Well, it's
all my
possible
cousins.
that might happen to some people,
Yeah.
for sure.
Oh my, well, some of them didn't. I was like, some of them were like survivors that were born with us.
Yeah.
So I think some of it's justified, but still, like all my cousins, none of my cousins are saved. They all grew up in Christian families. I have one cousin that's saved. I mean, it's just like it feels like no one's saved in their faith. So it's just discouraging. I feel like I look at my class and we have kids, and I'm like, how many of these kids are going to be in 10 years are going to think hate my class?
They're not going to. My bet is that most of them were not like really involved in the youth ministry, and they didn't have someone outside of their parent. Because I'll tell you this, here's my experience. Sometimes homeschool parents are hard experience to deal with as a youth ministry person, because like it's almost like I have homeschool parents that won't let their kids do things that we do because they're like, I don't really do that. You know what I'm saying? Almost kind of insulated type of deal. I also think it's better too now with like a lot of co-op stuff and stuff like that. You know, they want to stuff.
Well, I'm sure there's a variety of factors, but I feel like, and part of it too is like. Oh, no. But part of it is that what you said, I do believe we're kind of. I'm not being.
You have a group of girls.
Yeah. So I meant- and I also.
So your girls you mentor, is that more, are they more apathetic or is it more that?
One of those mentor. But she likes to talk, so yeah, I think. I wondered.
Found wrong time.
But. No, and the third.
How old's your youngest, Melissa?
I also don't.
11. I have vivid memories of snuggling my little babies in rock. Very vivid. Like, I held on to them.
Cycles, and I feel like
Yeah, I
cycles are probably around here. after
When
the
you're
years.
so young.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
You don't
you're like 2 years in, but they're like, even like recognizing like.
They only
You know what I'm saying? And so, you know, I just think,
Oh, I agree.
They don't move.
I want to be treated like. Yeah, but you're
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah.